Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, for everyone that has joined this space on this Heroes Day. I hope you are having a restful Heroes Day. I see the messages coming in even before we begin the conversations. Thank you very much for keeping that coming. But the gentlemen and ladies, thank you. I see quite a number of people. I see Nsubuga who came in quite early there. I also saw Dixon and Nixon. Thank you for coming through. And we really appreciate that. Without wasting any more time, let's get into our conversation this evening, this Heroes Day. General, good evening, and thank you for agreeing to have these conversations as regular as we have them, especially to speak about patent issues that affect the country, but also to give the people a brief of where we will be. We'll start off with General helping us understand really what was the essence of the Heroes Day that we have today, and then we'll come on to the State of the Nation's address, consultative constitution and electoral reforms that the General was part of, and finally we'll end it with the Somalia question, which is really lingering on everyone's lips, looking at how fighters come. General, let's get to the first one this evening. When we look at Heroes Day, which was celebrating today, it was celebrated in Luero. The Prime Minister was the one that officiated it there. What's the significance of this Heroes Day? Does it still have any value to any Ugandan out there? And let us know why it came around in the first place. Over to you, General.
Thank you, Timothy. Well, national holidays in many countries which are linked to celebration of heroes, most times it is attached to countries that go through war, and where you find that wars are won. And you'll find that there are two types. There are countries where you find that a Heroes Day or a National Victory Day is celebrated by everybody. Now, in countries where you find that there is that kind of culture, most times you find that those who would have, one, the nature of the war, two, those who become victorious, the manner in which they craft the politics of a country. Because if the outcomes of a victory lead to a new chapter in the history of a country, where you find that conditions like equality for the law, like justice, like fairness, like inclusion, like people feel that they are part and parcel of a country or a nation, then you find that that kind of day is celebrated by the citizens, and it is easy to sustain that kind of day. We have seen countries where days are celebrated centuries after the event. Now, in other countries where, either because of the nature of the war or the mismanagement of the status of affairs, political, economic, social, after the day has been established, dedicated to victory. If it is mismanaged, it cannot be sustained. A number of times you find that a day is established by a group of people or a regime, and when the regime exits power, days are forgotten. In Uganda, we have got several days which have been established under different governments. And when the governments exit, that's the end of the celebration of days of that nature. For example, we have got a day like, I think, 27th of May. I think it used to be celebrated in Ushenyi by the UPC government. There was also, I think, 11th of April. That's when UNF took over, overthrew Amin. And I don't remember which other day. Now, unfortunately, because of the nature of the politics after UPC government and the nature of politics after UNF, those days have been forgotten. The only day that is still nationally celebrated now, and where you find that there is consensus on a country-wide basis, is Independence Day. Now then, here, the days we celebrate under the current political arrangement, I think is January 26th and like a Heroes Day, like this one, which was established to celebrate heroes who participated in the war. And however, I get a sense that this is not a day which is celebrated by all, because the nature, the post 26th of January, the nature of politics, if it had been managed well, to the extent that there would be justice, that there would be fairness, that there would be equality for the law, that there would be inclusion, and people would feel, all citizens across the board. I think even the contention of history before the war can easily be forgotten once you go through a conflict, even when there are people who are grieved in the process of the conflict, even when one side wins the war. If the post-management of the war situation is of a nature that there are good outcomes, that there are positive outcomes across the board, that all citizens feel that, you know, I can go walk into an office and get a job without having an uncle, an aunt, or a friend, or a cousin, or whatever. I can go and bid for a contract in a ministry or in a district or in a department of government. I can get it. I can invest and I don't have to pay bribes. I can go to court if I've got a case and I can win that case without having to bribe anybody. Once you establish that, that translates into people celebrating and also embracing a day of this nature. This day is now under contention. My suspicion is that once the NRM wraps up, most likely there's going to be the end of the celebration of days of this nature, including 26th of January. It will become like the 25th of January of takeover of the 27th of May of UPC, of 11th of April of UNLF, most likely. That's what is likely to happen. Because instead of moving in a positive direction, this regime has continued moving in a negative direction. That's my personal observation.
Very sad, even as you concluded that way. But even the medals that are awarded, given that this is supposed to be celebrating people that are making a difference in the country and having a significant impact in the country, and I'm grateful for that. I want to leave it at that so that we pick up something that you were part of before we come to the State of the Nation's address. The consultative, constitutional, and electoral reforms. You were part of these. You had also other 6 leaders from different political parties. National Unity Platform was represented. FDC was represented. You had an array of parties that was there. What was this about? And was it just consultation?
We were invited by the leader of opposition's office, and they had created a platform where we would share views on how to conduct reforms, constitutional reforms, and electoral reforms. And it was a good platform because we interacted and also did reviews. They invited experts who spoke on different topics that they were given. But they were consistent with an exercise we've been conducting several times. I believe, I remember we conducted an exercise of that nature after 2006, after 2011, after 2016. The unfortunate thing is that we've never seen any outcomes of those consultations and the packages that normally put together, the technical experts put together. They are just hung there in some shelves. They are never implemented. However, the positive aspect is that, one, when you're in a struggle, you don't give up. Even when you don't get whatever, even if it's not a significant percentage of whatever you are fighting for, that's not the issue. Persistence is a very, very critical issue, and maintenance of hope and focusing on victory. 2, the environment, to create an environment where, like those of us who are in the opposition, meet and do reviews. And at this point in time, I believe it is quite necessary for us to keep on interacting as opposition parties, not only around electoral and constitutional reforms, but around creating an atmosphere in which we can see how we can do a number of things that are possible to be done together, maintain pressure on the regime to continue speaking out to the public and creating hope. Because in my own estimation, one of the biggest challenges we right now face is the loss of hope in the population and in many actors. Therefore, we in the opposition have got to focus a lot on that, besides all other things that we would need to do. Because you cannot easily succeed to mobilize people if they are in a state of hopelessness. So it was a good event, and there are going to be more of that will be organized, some formal, others informal.
Okay. As we continue this conversation, you and I, General, we want to be able to look at something that is very patent. For the people that are listening to the General and myself here, the ladies and gentlemen on Twitter Spaces, please, if you have a question, drop it in the chat there. The General will be responding to those ones in the last half hour. The first hour will be discussing the topics that we put together here. But if you have a question, please drop it in the chat. The General will be responding. I'll be getting to those questions in a short while. General, if you know that these consultative meetings for constitutional and electoral reforms really have not bore any fruit, then why do you continue to go on with them?
Because it is a struggle. A struggle is not a one-day event. And I think that is the biggest challenge we have always faced. I have a feeling that many people who are breaking down and losing hope is because their focus was on short-term victories. When you're in a struggle, you never focus on time. I keep advising colleagues, you never focus on time. You focus on the end state. What objectives have you set yourselves? What do you want to achieve? Yes, you can have a timetable and set like you want to achieve this in 5 years, but you don't focus on the time. You focus on the achievement of the objectives. Why is it very, very important to separate the two? Because if you focus on time, every time you hit a target and nothing has happened yet, if you set yourself 5 years again, and nothing has happened, you can easily give up. But if your focus is on the end state, what end state do you desire to create? What objectives do you intend to fulfill, establish? You keep focused on that, regardless of however long it takes you. And therefore, I mean, those of us who are in the opposition, what have we always struggled for? We need to see a free and a free society where people are equal before the law, where there are equal opportunities, where there's justice, where there's fairness, where there are transparent management of national resources, where there's national development that in which all citizens participate, where you don't find people feeling marginalized. So we have not achieved that yet. So if you have not achieved that, how on earth can you give up? You have to keep at it until you achieve it. That's why, to me, I don't think it's a waste of time. I don't think there is a need for anybody to become, hopeless. I keep asking people, why do people look for money all their lives until they hit their 70s, 80s? Some of them keep looking for money until they die. It's just because it is something personal. They want to live a comfortable life. So is politics. Politics is at the foundation of everything, in life. So I always ask people, how can you be looking for money all your life? And when it comes to politics, you try 10 years, 15 years, and when it doesn't get straightened out, then you give up. Why? Because politics is linked to every other activity in life. If you're looking for money and there are many problems, a significant number of challenges that you face are rooted in mismanagement in politics. In all areas, if there is a problem in health, if there's a problem in education, if there's a problem in roads, if it's a problem in environment, it is linked to politics. So if anything, I think politics is an area where we should never, ever, ever even dream of ever giving up on something that is so critical to our living conditions when we are still on this side of life. So we have to keep at it, regardless of how long it takes, until we succeed in what we've set ourselves to achieve.
General, this seems like an uphill task. The members of parliament are about 529. of which the biggest percentage is the NRM, the smallest is the opposition, being with 51 from NUP, less than 30 from FDC. The constitution is changed there. These amendments you're talking about are changed in there. Also, you've said something about money and the vulnerability of Ugandans. How long should they wait for this change, the fundamental change or the change that could happen in this struggle before they give up? Because the gap between the rich and the poor is growing every day. They can't wait for constitutional reforms to make the changes they desire. And two, you neither have representation in parliament to be able to make these amendments. How are you going to do it?
You see, there are two actors in this regard. There are actors in parliament, those are 500. But the main actors is the population. Who sends these people in parliament? It is the population. So if we remain active, and as you are saying, if more and more get aggrieved, actually the kind of situation I notice in the country is that we have got a lower percentage of representation in parliament, but outside there, I believe that within the population, the opposition or people who are aggrieved are more and more. Every year that passes, they get more and more in numbers. We have got more people now in the side of change than, for example, we had in the 2001 to 10 decade. The 2020 decade, they increased in numbers. Now they are more than what we saw 2010 and 2020. So what we need to do is keep on addressing both. Working with the smaller number that we have in parliament, also working with the population, because if the population wants change, they're the ones who can change the shape of parliament easily. I mean, we saw like in the last election, Uganda was largely an NRM stronghold in terms of representation. Just one election cycle, literally wiped out NRM. Now, the unfortunate thing, of course, is that in the opposition, we put our eyes off the areas which we had won. We didn't consolidate those areas. So you can imagine if we had consolidated the areas we had taken before, in the 2000s, in Acholi, in Teso, in West Nile, in Kasese, in Rukunjiri, and in the east like Mbale. If we had consolidated those, and now central region goes, the dynamics in the country would be completely different. So the actors are not only the people in parliament, even the people out there. And as you observe, as more and more people get hit by the economy, they have to recognize that becoming desperate and giving up doesn't help. If anything, the more suppressed they feel, the more aggrieved they feel, the more they should be active in ensuring that they participate in changing the situation that will make their conditions better. And we have to keep talking to them on that until we're able to achieve it.
General, an election in this country, if we're talking about the 6 cycles that have happened in this country, we have had maybe 4 out of 6 petitions. And even when you made the last electoral reforms, the only thing that changed was from the Electoral Commission to the Independent Electoral Commission. How sure are you, some of these consultative ideas that you have had, even with the experts in the room, that these will go forward? What hope should Ugandans have in this process?
I believe in the saying that success is an outcome of preparation meeting with opportunity. I believe in that so deeply. Now I bump into so many people who are hoping for opportunity, but they never prepare. And whenever opportunities come when you are unprepared, you will not easily succeed. Opportunity can simply pass. So to me, continuing to prepare ourselves, even for the fact that we would want to be well organized, so that at the point any party, whether it is NUP, whether it is FDC, whether it is ANT, at any point any of the parties takes power, that it is well organized, that it has participated in preparing the things that need to be done. even if not much of these things are not put into place or amendments are not done by the regime. By any time when an opportunity comes, because opportunities come through different directions, if you end up in power, if something happens that you find the party find itself in power. I mean, we have seen countries where suddenly a party is in power, because of different conditions that happen in countries. We have seen an election which was held in Egypt. In Egypt, one of the most interesting things one needs to learn from Egypt, youth who were grieved were sparked off by something that didn't even start in Egypt. It started in Tunisia. A guy set himself on fire in Tunisia, a guy called I think Bouaziz. And then a spontaneous street action started in Tunisia and they spilled over into Egypt. And a revolution was sparked off, or an insurrection more or less, or an uprising, a civil uprising, and they overthrew the regime. And then they called for election in 6 months. And those who had been on the streets were not organized at all. And they were dispersed in that election. They were beaten, hands down, by a party which had been organizing itself for 4 centuries, actually 5 centuries. The Islamic Brotherhood had been under repression from the 50s, actually. So 6 months, it resurrected itself from the different fronts in which it was operating, because it could not operate in the open. There's no way the under Mubarak and before Mubarak, the regimes even before Mubarak had suppressed the Islamic Brotherhood. So when they suppressed it and they found they had no political space, they decided to start operating through different fronts. They started operating through civil society organizations, through the health sector, through educational sectors, but network. And in 6 months, they just came out and became a political organization, but they were so networked that they won an election. So preparing, organizing should be constant and should be continuous until you achieve your objectives. So I have no problem well, I have a problem in the sense that this regime is insensitive. It literally doesn't care about what happens in the country. But we have to keep doing what we are doing, preparing ourselves. One, that we can achieve victory when we get the population behind us, like what happened recently in Uganda, what had happened for Inachori, what had happened for Inteso, what had happened in West Nile. There can be a sudden shift. So when there's a shift of a population, it had better find any party which is focused, well organized. So that once that party gets into power, it has the capability to manage power. Because taking power is not an end in itself. You have to manage power. If you are not well organized, how will you manage it? Just going on within a year, 2 years, you'll mess it up.
General, my last 2 questions on this. One, you as leaders of opposition, you are the leader of opposition, the different factions that are there, all these different parties, DP, and we talk about NUP, do you trust each other in this process? That's 1. 2, why is there a contradiction between the leader of opposition that called for these consultative meetings and the letter that was put out by the Honorable Chagulanyi? Does that also cause more mistrust amongst yourselves?
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of the letter you are talking about. What was the letter? Because the conference was opened by Honorable Chagulanyi as the leader of NUP.
Actually, in his letter that he posted on Twitter, where he was talking about this was not, it was just a meeting. There was nothing really, there was nothing substantial that was going to come out of this, and the struggle continues with the way they have been doing it. So that contradiction in the letter and the consultative meetings, but also you as leaders in the opposition, do you trust each other?
Well, I don't know the content of the letter, but I would like to believe that maybe his focus was to say that they are going to continue with civil disobedience activities. And to me, I have never seen any conflict between having different fronts. One struggle, many fronts. NUP can go on and organize itself in pushing for change through civic action. It doesn't stop it and other parties to participate in a parliament, to strengthen parliament as a front where the opposition can expose the regime, where it can build hope in the population, to where the members of parliament of the opposition work to ensure that they consolidate the areas where they are, so that in the next round of elections, we work to overwhelm the regime, but also consolidating the areas we would have taken. Otherwise, if you don't fight on all those fronts, you would be weakening yourself. I don't see any conflict in having a meeting of that nature. Even if there may not be a tangible outcome in terms of the regime conducting reforms, but even the meeting and building trust, elevating levels of trust in itself is an achievement. It has been worked on continuously. We have different approaches, and I think that's where the weakness in the opposition has been. When we have different weaknesses, it's as if it's a source of conflict. I've never seen that, to me. I always know parties, we need to learn from other experiences. A party like ANC used to operate on the ground. It even had a military arm, which we don't have. It had Mkoto Wesiza, it was in the bushfighting. It had civil disobedience activities that it used to conduct. Many people could recall the uprisings which used to be in Soweto and many other towns. It was operating on the diplomatic front, and it was preparing itself long term as a party to engage in politics. And then it operated on all these fronts. By the time it engaged in the negotiations and took power, it was in a state of running the country. So I don't see any conflict in operating on many fronts myself. And I keep on advising many of the colleagues that we shouldn't see it as a source of conflict, that we can all engage on different fronts, but still coordinate effort where we find that there are areas where we can work together, where we can work differently, we operate and organize differently, build strength, but bring those strengths together to exert on the regime. I don't see any source of conflict at all.
General, let me read bits of this letter, especially the National Unity Platform believes Uganda observes better laws, deserves better laws and policies, including better election laws. However, under the present military regime, the reforms cannot be allowed to sail. The NRM would manufacture numbers to block the meaningful reforms. Predictably use the opportunity to bring the law into further derail and defeat democracy rule. The people of Uganda, therefore, do not bank or hope in any legislative reforms under this government. So that's some of the detail within the letter that Honorable Kyagulanyi signed. But let's switch gears a bit, Honorable General Muntu, and look at any updates on the Alliance for National Transformation, because I'm going to link it to a question that has been dropped in our inbox here. Any updates that Alliance for National Transformation is up to in the last few months, and what should we be expecting of them going forward?
We've been engaging in trainings, workshop trainings of youth leaders, of women league leaders. We've also been having the Youth League, Women League conducting activities with the civil society organization, with other parties. The outreaches to the ground, we had slackened, but we're about to resume. We want to do them within the resources available. And normally what we do is we go down and engage with the populations at district level, down to sub-county level, because our intention is to ensure that we have established branches at every parish, at every sub-county and district, and then we train the leaders at all those levels so that we can fulfill our objectives of having two pillars. The pillar of having organizational infrastructure, that's branch networks with the committees at all levels. We also train the leaders so that we can think and operate from the same text, the same platform, in terms of our policy objectives, in terms of the value system that drive the politics of ANT. So we keep at it in spite of the handcuffs that we have, most of them which are resource constraints. Also keep working on that front, keep on raising resources to enable us to fulfill the overall objectives of the party.
General, let me get to some questions here, and one that was quite interesting for me that I need you to be able to respond to. This is Ayevare. He says, what do we have to do in order to balance the boat? People think Ant is soft-spoken, and cannot favorably compete in the political spaces. Intellectualism versus populism. Your response to this, General?
Well, organizing doesn't require you to be, I don't know the opposite of soft-spoken. What is it? What the opposite of being soft-spoken? Aggressive or what? I don't think that organizing requires any form of aggression. Organizing is simply putting people together in terms of formal structures. Like if you have a branch network at the village, at the parish, at the sub-county, and then you engage in leadership training, entrepreneurial training. I know, so people can act in concert around common objectives, common principles, common values. Where does speaking in that regard come in? I don't see where it comes in at all. You know, and work on policy policy alternatives, and then communicating to the public, or like now we're having a conversation. We conduct these conversations twice a month. There's one where I have a platform. The other leaders of the party also have a different platform. We keep on communicating to the public. I don't see where that requires being aggressive. You need, if you need to be, even in the army, by the way, in the army, you are not aggressive as a person. You can be aggressive in terms of strategy and tactics, in terms of how you conduct warfare. But you don't have to be aggressive as a commander, that you have to raise your voice. Oh no, if you have got good strategic plans and operational plans and the tactics to apply, you don't even have to be hard by someone in 20 meters to win a war. I mean, you execute the strategic operational and tactical plans that you have, and you fight. You can even be aggressive in terms of your strategies and tactics, but you need not to be aggressive in terms of how you conduct yourself as an individual. So I have always been puzzled by that question, because I've been asked many times, say, Muntu, you seem to be a diplomat. How will you manage politics? I believe in politics of organization. I don't believe in talking, like aggressively, because it doesn't help at all. Because we are not in a boxing ring. We are not in judo or karate or wrestling. No, we're trying to oust a regime, and to me, ousting a regime requires you to be well organized. That's all.
Another question, General, that comes through before we switch to our last two topics here. One is someone is asking, thank you, General, and the entire team that is listening. This is Ronald there. My question is, why do you keep saying population is the main actor, yet we always play our role through elections? What else do you expect from us as the population?
Elections can be influenced by the population itself. I mean, like, look at the time when we as FDC had taken over West Nile, taken over Chori, taken over Teso, then we took Kasese. Actually, like in 2016, we took Kasese at all levels. We had 6 members of parliament out of 6. We had 27 LC3 chairpersons. We had 32 LC5 councillors. We also had the chair of the district. So there's no way we could have achieved that without the population turning in the favor of change. Same thing which happened with West Nile, Chori, and Teso, and Rukunjiri. And then recently, when Nup took Buganda, there's no way Nup could have taken Buganda unless the population shifted radically. If the country shifted radically, there is nothing a regime can do. They can manipulate, they can do whatever. They may delay, but they cannot sustain themselves, under force for long. What advantage is in now is that they are focusing on suppressing Nup in Uganda because we lost in the other areas. if the largest part of the country, and two, maybe as I respond to this question, we always have had, I think, a weakness in the opposition, and I hope we need to rectify that. We contend take power at the presidency and also concentrate a lot in taking parliament. And we make advance in taking parliament and also increasing our percentages in the presidential candidate, what the presidential candidate gets. But we never focus on the ground. And for us as ANT, that's where we keep focusing. We think that if you take the councils down, you have like, if we had the 40% of the councils down, consistent with the vote at the presidential level, the political terrain in this country would be completely different. Because look, for example, 40% of 2000 is what? 40% of 2000 is 800. 800. Imagine if we had 40%, if we had 40% of local government, what would that mean translated into LC3 chairpersons? It would mean we would be having 800 LC3 chairpersons out of 2,000. You can imagine if you have 800 LC Gombor or sub-counties under your control. You literally influence the politics of the country. But how many do we have combined opposition? We don't even have 200. You know? So to us, we think that we need to work in such a way that the percentages we get are translated at all levels. Because if you have 40% at LC5 council, LC3 council, in mayors, in MPs, and you have 40%, even if they have cheated you at the presidential level, you literally you've got a ground. Once you consolidate it, you can expand it and overhaul the regime the next round. You never focus on the ground to that extent. And to me, I think that is a weakness.
Thank you, General. Because of time, we're going to stick to the questions that are coming in. Please keep the questions coming in. Those on spaces, please drop them in the chat there. I'll be reading them and putting them forth to the General. This question comes in from Mbabazi Francis Kakande, who says, we need to reconsider the thought that operating on different fronts is beneficial to Uganda's present political dilemma. The fool does the same thing over and over again and expects different results. A more united front needs to be developed in order to lead Uganda where it desires. General, that's the question to you. About the difference in fronts, don't we need to have a unified front? Because the goal, the big goal or the strategy is the change in the country. So don't we need to have a unified front in the opposition rather than have different fronts pushing in different directions for the same goal?
I think we are talking about two different issues. One, I think it's talking about, for example, fielding one candidate. My suspicion is that that's what you must be talking about. But see, when I'm talking about different fronts, it's about different strategy. I mean, for example, in the opposition, there are those who believe that they should put more effort in civil disobedience, and the others believe that they can organize parties at the grassroots level and participate in politics as a way of weakening the regime and eventually taking power. So those two fronts, I don't see any problem. A party can participate in both. You can organize in towns for civil disobedience, but also organize at the lower level so that if civil disobedience does not succeed, then you go into an electoral cycle, 5 years. You've gone through 4 years without taking power through civil disobedience. In the last 1 year, you need to have prepared yourself to engage in an election now as another war front. While you are conducting your politics in parliament to expose the regime, to put more and more pressure on the regime, and also operating on the diplomatic front and in the diaspora, the Ugandan diaspora. These are different fronts. That's what I'm talking about. Now, if it's still about having a coalition, I have no problem with that. The only difference we have, at least in our own thinking, is that even for the coalition to be strong, you need to build strength as different entities. If you find a strong NT, a strong NUP, a strong FDC, and they go into an alliance or they go into a coalition, then you bring together strength. But if you are not well organized and you are weak, combining weakness does not necessarily give you strength. You know, so I have no problem in us being well organized on the ground. To find, for example, that combined we can field candidates 100%, that you can field teams to conduct the whole electoral process. You have agents in all the 35,000 polling stations. Once you coordinate effort, those who work to the extent that is possible to field single candidates, all that is possible. Where you can field them, you field single candidates. Where you are not able to, you should not let it generate conflict. You can still manage it. Discipline is required as far as I'm concerned. If we are going to put off something that brings together a coalition which is meaningful, which is resolute, and also focused. We can work on whatever weaknesses if we learn from lessons in the past.
General, let me first pose the questions there. Even please keep your feedback coming through. I see some of it still coming through, and I'll be responding to that. Let me just engage General in one more topic so that we can be calling it an evening with the questions there. General, the Somalia question. Do we still need to be in Somalia? It's been 16 years. We're still there. We have trained a number of soldiers, Somali citizens, and taken them back to be able to manage their own situation. How long do we need to be there? Why is this situation escalating? And how bad is it from your military view?
Africa needs to be in Somalia until Somalia is able to sort out its own internal politics. I think African forces need to be in Somalia to the extent that the Somali army is trained, but also that the regime there and the other actors, AU needs to keep on encouraging them to negotiate so that at the point when the African forces pull out, that Somalia remains stable. So does UPDF have to remain in Somalia? Not necessarily. I think Uganda or any other country which is there right now, Uganda could pull out, Burundi could pull out, Kenya could pull out, Djibouti could pull out, Ethiopia could pull out, just like Sierra Leone pulled out. To me, in as long as there are replacements, that's why AU has to work around the clock to ensure that the moment UPDF is pulling out, that there's a replacement by another African force. Why so? I think they need to keep studying the ground, at least to the extent that they feel comfortable, that the moment they pull out, that the political issues would have been resolved through discussions among the Somalis themselves, and that the government that would be there would sustain itself in power, and they keep on meeting their challenges to resolve them. Why so? Because as long as Al-Shabaab, or unless Al-Shabaab abandons its objectives of destabilizing areas out of Somalia, if Al-Shabaab concentrated in managing Somalia, in whatever manner it manages it, I don't think it would be our concern as African countries outside of Somalia. I mean, we have many African countries which are mismanaging their own people. You don't have to go sorting out internal problems of countries. The only problem with Al-Shabaab is that it had objectives of being a base to train people who would go destabilize other countries. I think that's how other African countries get thrown in. I mean, you can see it's not only Al-Shabaab that operates from such a philosophy. You can see like recently what happened in Mozambique, in northern Mozambique. Mozambique had to invite SADC forces and Rwanda. They're the ones who went there and stabilized the situation in Mozambique. Before Somalia, the Al-Shabaab was taken out in Somalia, one of the intentions was to literally capture or influence politics along the whole East African coast, which means the Mombasa coastal area, Dar es Salaam would all be unstable. And those of us who are landlocked, if that whole regional East African regional coastal region is destabilized, we would be impacted by problems of trade. Once your trade route, because we don't have anywhere straight through, It's either through Dar es Salaam or through Mombasa. So you can imagine if those both areas are unstable. So to me, that is the only complication. My hope is that AU works around the clock to ensure that the countries which have been there long, like Uganda, like Burundi, are relieved. The danger, I suspect, is if they don't get any forces to relieve those who have been there long, and the countries pull out. If the Somali forces are not able to sustain control and stability in Somalia, and Al-Shabaab takes over, if it still has objectives of becoming a ground for training forces to stabilize the region, then we'll still have problems in the region. That's where the dilemma is. And unfortunately, I am not privy to briefings. We don't have briefings in terms of how far the training of the Somali forces has gone. We don't have briefings about intelligence in Somalia, the political military situation. I have no clue. So all the things I'm talking about are out of an analysis as an outsider and who is at a distance.
General, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 8 minutes to be able to close this space. So I'm going to put these 3 questions to the General. If you have any more, please send them through in the shortest time possible so that he can be able to respond. General, if you could please take note of these questions. The first one comes in from Babazi Francis Kakande, says, what extent of civil disobedience needs to be reached in order to achieve removal of this current government? And haven't we exhausted the practicability of this option? Okay, thank you. The second question, General, comes in and says, John Burns says, the military aspect in mobilization is inevitable, General. It's a tool the dictator uses in suppressing the growth and expansion of anti-regime forces, okay? The last one comes in from Chibuka Leslie Barije. He says, thank you, General. True Ugandan nationalists and Pan-Africanists, the possibility of a transition without war or election, take for example, now that the president is sick, what would happen assuming the worst case scenario happens? Over to you, General. The second question was, the military aspect in mobilizing is inevitable, General. It is a tool that the dictator uses in suppressing the growth and expansion of anti-regime forces. So he's saying the military is used to suppress any anti-government forces. What your thoughts are? And the last one is about especially the scenario of the president right now and war, as transition should be happening.
Well, the first question about civil disobedience. Once one is inclined to use civil disobedience, one, it is legitimate, it is also lawful. I mean, it's a constitutional provision that people can express themselves or express their grievances through civil disobedience. The regime acts as if it is a criminal act. It is not. It's legal, it is legitimate. So you do analysis and you find out how feasible it is. Any group that wants to use that route, one, continuous training, because it requires a lot of training. You have to train people in levels of consciousness. You have to train them in levels of organization. You've trained them in different ways because you don't only have the physical on the street. There are many other things that can be done in terms of civil disobedience. Now you can apply effort at any time you gauge and find that it is possible to do that. It depends on those who are coordinating that effort. You can know when to do that. You can know when to pull back. You can see how long it takes to sustain that. But if you believe in it, you don't give up. You keep at it different times, different opportunities until it achieves the results. If it doesn't achieve results and another route that is used achieves the results, what one requires really is change. Two, there are two types of civil disobedience actions. There are those which are deliberate, which you prepare for, and then you generate them yourselves. You for example, get one issue and you say, we're going to go on the streets. That's one. But also two, civil disobedience, which is spontaneous. Now, if the one of being deliberate going on the street is not possible because of whatever conditions prevail in that, doesn't stop people from continuing organizing quietly without necessarily going on the streets, preparing people, organizing them, Because when there are spontaneous action, there are times when something happens and it triggers people spilling onto the streets without anybody organizing them at all. Then you can take advantage of that kind of situation if you have got your networks of organization. Like when you saw all those demonstrations which happened in Tunisia, in Egypt, most times they were not organized at all. It was spontaneous, they just spilled onto the streets. And you can easily lose objectives if it is spontaneous and you have no direction to take thereafter. So it depends on those who are inclined to that. They can do analysis, they can do whatever they find is feasible to be done. Now, military involvement in internal politics is, of course, wrong. The regime uses now the army as its foundation for survival. There's no doubt about that, because it's weak. It's getting weaker and weaker, and the weaker it gets, the more it will be using the military to suppress legitimate opposition or legitimate grievances. We have to keep on exposing that. Hopefully, at some point, maybe there are people in the regime who may wake up and understand the danger that this could cause, that you to recognize the reality that you cannot suppress people permanently, and hopefully they can turn around and then take a different direction. Whether they do that or not, I don't know, but doesn't stop people from keeping on, exposing and talking and maintaining hope within the population. And the last question was: suppose we wake up one day and we find that there is no control from the central government, right? Was that the question? Yeah. I mean, for example, if a regime implodes, if a regime was to implode, and there is no opposition party which is well organized and has built trust with the population to the extent that it, through hope and trust the population has, it can keep communicating and hold the country together and move it through a crisis, the country can fall apart. I just keep looking at, our existence in Somalia, our existence, UPDF fighting in the many failed states. It's not only our physical presence. We should be learning lessons. We should ask ourselves, why do these countries fail? I mean, all of us who are political actors, also those who are in the government, we should be asking ourselves, we've had an army in a country for 16 years. How on earth can a country implode and it takes 16 years for it to reorganize, to restabilize? Those are questions we should be asking ourselves. It is sheer stupidity for anybody to put their heads in the sand and say, that can't happen here. So did people think in Somalia. So possibly did people think in Egypt. So that's what I suspect people were thinking in Zimbabwe, or people were thinking in Libya or Sudan. That's what people were thinking possibly. So we must always keep looking at why has this happened elsewhere. Like now, if you find all the kind of fear that there is within the population, loss of hope, it looks like that. How can you have a government?
General,
half of cabinet is caught up in a scandal. They are appearing in courts where they are going to parliament. Parliament cannot raise that question. What does that signal? It just simply signals that we are in a banana republic, as far as I'm concerned. That happens nowhere else. So those are not good signals.
General, even as you're going to give us your parting shots, let me squeeze in this one question, especially being that it is very pertinent to what you've just concluded with. Kenneth Agaba says, there is no doubt you will make an excellent president, but how are you going to deal with the monarchy tendencies that the president in his politics and the army forces that he has done? Being that the army officers are preaching the gospel of the sun, how do we recover as a country from this? As you give your parting shots as we close this space today, General. Over to you.
My understanding of UPDF is that there has got many officers and men: one, who love the country; two, who are well educated; three, who are well trained in terms of the military training, and who can professionalize the army once any group takes over and puts in place the political conditions that are enabling for it to professionalize. I wouldn't see a problem in the UPDF professionalizing itself. And of course, in a group that takes power would also have to have the capacity and the skills to create discipline in the security services, in the army, police, and the intelligence services. You know, those services need to know that they cannot operate above the law, that everybody must be, equal before the law, even institutions, that they must be subject to civilian control. So I wouldn't see a problem in that regard. In issues like tackling corruption, you just build a team. There are many Ugandans who are disciplined. You just, as long as the top is not corrupt, and the top meaning the president and the cabinet, they lead the way and the country follows. People always follow the leaders. If the leaders go in the wrong direction, most times the population follows. They go in the right direction, the population gets emboldened, and even people who are crusaders against corruption will now get space to fight at all levels, because corruption is bleeding this country wide. There are many Ugandans who can do that. It's just a question of having leaders who have the skill and of course the resilience and the focus and the discipline to create the environment in which the other Ugandans can operate different levels in the public sector and the private sector to revive the country and move it in the correct direction.
Thank you very much, General. General, we have come to the end of our space. Your parting shots and a call to Ugandans, especially as we conclude this space today. Over to you, General.
Thank you, Timothy, for hosting me. Thank you, our colleagues who are on the different platforms who have put aside what you've been doing to engage in this conversation. My only call out from me and from the colleagues on behalf of the colleagues in ANT, our view is that one, we should not lose hope as a people. We must prepare ourselves for the inevitable, because change will happen. So beyond change, when General Mugisha is no longer a president of this country, which will happen sooner than most people would even believe, there must be people who are able to take power and manage it and move it in the correct direction. Need to do that. Therefore, the more people who come on board in ANT and those who join other parties, and we prepare ourselves as we struggle to oust the regime, the better. So I keep calling upon Uganda, those who believe in us as ANT, let's join forces and keep on building without losing hope until we are able to take power. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the ladies and gentlemen that have joined us on different platforms there to be able to discuss these patent issues. But from us to you, God bless you. Have a fabulous weekend.
Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the ladies and gentlemen that have joined us on different